During his travels, and upon his return, Conclave de Pravia became obsessed with the idea of producing a map of the world, as detailed and specific as possible, even if he couldn't see most of it with his own two eyes. And so he traded with Eastern merchants in their own waters, as well as cast about for information in various academic circles. This led him to create the Lurthecla, translated simply as the world map. The Lurthecla would be the most comprehensive map since the Aisna, a map which had reigned supreme for over 630 years, and even go on to inform later Eastern maps, forming the basis for their understanding of the world beyond Asia. One major difference between the Aisna and the Lurthecla is that the Lurthecla recognizes 8 great powers, including an analysis of their flags, rulers, dominant cultures, and their prevailing faith. Beginning now with the 8 great powers, first among them is the Empire of Shaojin, with their crucifix-bearing banner under Huangdi Changshu Fei of the Wu culture beneath the Yuzhou Church. Next, the Kingdom of Gaizhou, with their flag of the Holy Grail under Guowang Linmei Du of the Shandong culture under the Yuzhou Church. Then, the Kingdom of Poyang, with their 8-pointed cross flag under Nuwang Sujian Qi of the Gan culture under the Yuzhou Church. Then, the Roman Empire, with their 5-fold eagle flag representative of the Bonifilii, under Imperator Sergio Andenid of the Romagnol culture, keepers of the Old Hellenic faith. Then, the Empire of Namning, with their yellow lotus flag, under Huangdi Shuanan Qiaoshin Zhuang of the Zhuang culture, under the Yuzhou Church. Then, the Empire of Rajasthan, with their Drabsha-bearing flag, bearing verses from their Book of Light, under Maharaja Bhimsen Gorkha of the Nepali culture, made up of Mandaean faithful, alone in all the world. Then, the Empire of Mongolistan, with their abstract banner representative of the Holy Spirit, under Khan Ligtan Argteni of the Mongol culture beneath the Zovsanol Church. Then, finally, the Empire of Phrygia, with their Eagle of Zeus banner, under Imperator Philippos Agathoclid of the Greek culture under the Church of Phrygian Hellenism. One major difference here which must be stated is the difference for why the Eastern powers are great and the Western powers are great. The Eastern powers are great for their advanced technology and ascendant mastery of the world, whereas Western powers are great for their vast tracts of land and venerable institutions reaching back into antiquity. Now, it is worth noting that, on his travels, Conclave de Pravia converted to Christianity during his time in the East, and this indeed colors his perception of the world as he documents it for the Lurthecla. Beginning with his home, Avarignia, it comprises all of the Iberian Peninsula and then some, which makes this first leg of the map rather easy. The Kingdom of Avarignia, with their 8-spoked banner under Rex Alfonso and Achitas de Roma, was of the Iberic culture with some Basque and Celtic inclusions, and by this era a fairly even split between Iberic paganism and Simulcanism, which had become so ingrained in fact it was no longer even referred to as a cult. They were on the historical upswing, though they knew it not. The Gallic region was defined by the division between Avarignia in the north and Triballia in the south. Avarignia, under Queen Cecily de Foix, was uniformly of the Francian culture and Old Hellenic faith, defined by greater urbanism and a closer relationship with Rome. Meanwhile, Triballia, under King Tomal Lavalon, was divided between the Gascon and Occitan cultures, though both had Old Hellenism in common, and the kingdom itself was defined by rural aristocracy lording over vast tracts of rich farmland, with a more pronounced naval presence which they used to trade with Avarignia and harass Roman vessels. The Italic region was completely dominated by Rome, as was the Germanic and Britannic region, which was already covered earlier, so there is not much left to say, save for the empire's political situation. As the dominant power in Europe, even after the fall, Imperator Sergio nevertheless sought to rebuild the empire via a series of satellite states. However, Britannia remained incomplete, which drew resources away from the empire. These resistant territories were the culturally Frisian Kingdom of England, under King Ferarch Grey, and the Celtic Lordship of Gwynedd under Lady Beatag II Cochrane. They both subscribed to local varieties of Norse paganism and were wild in temperament, sacrificing whosoever they captured to their bloodthirsty one-eyed god, Wotan. Northern Europe was defined by Danemark, Norland, and Samogisha, all vying for power in the north. The Danes of the north, under King Torbjorn Saltensee, was at the helm of a virile nation-state of Danes, having returned to the old ways of Norse paganism. The Norwegians of Norland and the Latvians of Samogisha, however, feared the power of their northern cousin, and sheepishly returned to Rome for aid, playing directly into the hands of Imperator Sergio. Samogisha, under Queen Ivalda Waldeck, even fully embraced Old Hellenism, while Norland, under Queen Freya Drake, suffered a distinct crisis of identity over this fact. Eastern Europe was perhaps the most diverse, with Perugia, Galicia-Volhynia, Box, and Ordovicia being counted amongst that region. Things were fairly stable, though a prevailing sense of anxiety plagued them regarding the looming threat of Mongolistan, resulting in a split forming in the region. Ironically, those closest to Rome, like the culturally Sorbian Parisians under Kniaz Vyacheslav Langa, and the Slovaks of Box under Queen Marshal Bathory, aligned themselves against Rome, seeing them as the primary threat to their existence, while the Ruthenians of Galicia-Volhynia under Queen Anastasia III Jagiellon, and the Dagestanis of Ordovicia under Ghazi Asjayat Shamkal aligned themselves with Rome, seeing Mongolistan as the primary threat to their existence. The faiths of the East were a disorganized mix of Old Hellenism and local pre-Roman beliefs, though this divide would only grow more apparent the further a given kingdom drifted either towards or away from Rome. As for the Balkans, there are really only two factors at play, Sirdia and Phrygia. The Croatian kingdom of Sirdia, under their king, Ladislav Eltz, aligned itself firmly against Rome, counting itself as part of the Mediterranean alliance which sought to defy the empire, though it did align itself with Phrygia, and over the course of the 16th century would slowly convert from Old Hellenism to Phrygian Hellenism, as a way of marking this fact. The eastern Mediterranean was dominated by Phrygia, which was already covered, so like Rome, its political state will be recounted here. Phrygia was a paranoid empire, surrounded on all sides by enemies which sought its destruction, be it the African kingdoms which harassed it to the south, the zealous Mongols to the east and north, or the Romans which contested them for control of the Mediterranean. One thing was for sure, they weren't taking any chances, and save for Sirdia, they closed themselves off from much of the world over the course of the 16th century. As a final note for Europe, there was the mysterious and isolationist kingdom of Iskland to the far northwest, of which not much is known. Moving on to the other continents, these were painted with much wider strokes. Africa, for example, features Phrygia in the east, and of course Rome and even Avarignia in the north, but the only true homegrown power was the kingdom of Toro, which lorded over the Servus Litus, the slave coast. With the decline of the Zamori slavers, Toro, under King Dionysos Buriam, saw the rise of their own slavers, taking over much of the market. These Greeks, of the Phrygian Hellenic faith, were only barely the majority, with Moroccans and Africans and even Slavs and Mongols coming together to make up the other 48% of the kingdom, bearing with them their various beliefs and traditions. This caused a great deal of ethnic strife and conflict, but the slave trade united all and kept Toro running. Indeed, throughout the 16th century, they would grow immensely, and the makeup of their slaves would become distinctly more African, as they raided against Ghana, Tubu, and Benin. The Middle East was dominated by Phrygia, Mongolistan, and Rajasthan, three nations already covered, and was significant only in the way that all three nations were prepared for war there, but none wanted to start it. Almost all the people and cultures native to the Middle East died out, though Phrygia did have a minority population of Omanis to their south, which were until recently independent in their kingdom of the Tustarids. Now, as for Asia, being the global center of power, it was already largely covered, leaving only a political analysis of the day. No political entity was friendly with another, and all were scrambling to establish a base of power for themselves which could not be challenged. The most premier amongst them were establishing empires far afield, even Liezhou, which was not counted amongst the great powers. Other secondary Asian powers included Tianshui, Tongren, Urad, and Ayutthaya. These secondary powers were decidedly strange, as while Tianshui were Chinese Christians typical of the region, Tongren were of the Miao culture, a Tibetan subset. Urad, under their queen Gundas Likagvasuren, were Mongols of the Yuzhou Church, and Ayutthaya was a Siamese kingdom of Theravada Buddhists who were violently resisting the Yuzhou Church, seeing their main rival in Nam Ning. Indeed, they created a league of Buddhists to resist the Christians of the north and east, bringing the kingdoms of Kumai, Lanzhang, Muangfuan, and Luang Prabang to bear against them. Finally, the Lurthecla leaves Oceania and the New World largely blank, as despite being actively colonized, they were still of a decidedly mysterious and nigh unknowable nature. And so that is the Lurthecla, in all of its obsessive detail, and as far as this chronicle is concerned, its timeless glory. Unfortunately, however, this map would soon be hopelessly out of date, as the Christians of the East refashioned the world in their image. Beginning in July of 1500, Nam Ning kicked off a trend of intercontinental exchange, with plans to bring Old World beasts of burden to their colony in the east, while taking back New World vegetables like potatoes, tomatoes, and chilies. Such an exchange would prove historically monumental, resulting in Nam Ning becoming a cultural powerhouse. They became famous for their spicy food, specifically the dish ronglong, or dragon mash. Such a dish included boiled potatoes mashed into a fine paste, along with chili peppers, curry spices, and occasionally, various forms of rice, like rice paste or rice flour. Such a dish was known in other parts of the East as yushan, or royal meal. Of course, Nam Ning also sourced slaves from the oceanic islands to farm these crops in the harsh climate characteristic of their new colony, but were careful not to let them outnumber their own settlers, at least not yet. In September 1503, Poyang employed a unique institution to help it colonize the New World, by framing it as a holy struggle. Back when the Fuxi attempted to conquer Japan for the Yuzhou Church, various holy orders were established for the cause, though after the failure most of them became mercenary bands, except for one, the Knights of the Flame, Hyoyan Shishi. The Hyoyan Shishi, instead of claiming a saint as their patron, claimed the Holy Spirit himself, representing him as he appeared at Pentecost, a tongue of flame. They persisted in their holy duties, loyal to no king or country, wandering around Asia and taking contracts from whosoever had a holy cause to fight. The Hyoyan Shishi fought on behalf of Nam Ning against the Buddhists of Ayutthaya, and even defended Mangkwang from the heretics of Rajasthan, and are largely credited for their continued existence. Their founder, a man named Jinhai Chen, was even canonized as a saint of the Yuzhou Church in 1409. But now, the Knights of the Flame were contracted by Poyang for the colonization of the New World, citing the conversion of savages and the smiting of wretched heathens. This would prove a highly effective move, as Poyang's colony of Pomo immediately began to grow, soon outclassing their neighbors' colonial holdings. Little did they know it, but the Hyoyan Shishi had found their home, and soon enough they would become a vital apparatus of Poyang's colonial and military infrastructure. In 1504, a war broke out between Serdia and Ordovisia, since Ordovisia sought to press some of its claims in the Phrygian Balkans, assuming it had Rome's support. However, Serdia, aligned with Phrygia, was directed by the Phrygians to invade Ordovisia. Rome, not seeking to spark a war with Phrygia and risk losing its vulnerable Mediterranean holdings, directed Galicia Volhynia to go to war against Ordovisia as well, resulting in a swift defeat for that kingdom, making them a landlocked country. Around this time, seeing that Rome was preoccupied with the events in Ordovisia, Perugia, England, and Denmark declared a unilateral war against Rome for the freedom of England. This called Samogitia and Norland into the war on Rome's side, which proved too much for Denmark, as they were torn asunder by these Roman-backed neighbors, even the Sapmi natives of the far north breaking away from them. Indeed, Samogitia nearly tripled in size by July of 1505. In 1506, King Savary de Foix of Avarignia did not share his mother's Roman sympathies, and, concerned that Rome was successfully regaining control of Europe, broke their alliance and invaded Rome, joining the war on the side of England. Unfortunately for them, however, it was too little too late, and England was cleaved in half by November of 1507, leaving Avarignia as the only warring party left to face the full brunt of Roman might. Meanwhile, in 1508, the Okhotsk tribe sprang a surprise attack on the colony of Pomo, which is when the Hyoyan Shishi found their opportunity to shine. Over the course of the next year, they carried out a campaign of holy war against the Okhotsk, and even when commanded to stop and enslave them, they did not listen, wiping them off the face of the earth as an example to the other natives. In 1510, the Avarignian colony grew, calling itself the Windward Islands, and began cultivating sugar as a major export. Interestingly, the Windward Isles, as they were often called, were being populated by Iberian pagans more so than Simulchians, and a particular family, long disgraced, had established itself as a major player in the region: the Caridi family. The Caridi family was listless after the death of the Republic, but since then they had found solace in business. Truly, business was the last bastion of democracy. Whoever had the best deal, the best policies, and whoever could convince the most people, won. As such, far from the withering eye of the crown, the Caridi flourished, thanks in large part to this very policy of stark, unforgiving business acumen. This, of course, led to strife with another founding family in the Windward Isles, the De Pravia family, who had long been faithful Indocidi allies. Even if the Caridi went unnoticed by the crown, which no longer saw them as a threat, their machinations did not go unnoticed by the De Pravia family. In February of 1511, Asia erupted into war over the Isle of Qingchao, as Po Yang invaded the island while blockading the rest of Nam Ning. Nam Ning then called in Shaojin on its side, presenting the war as an opportunity to undo a colonial rival, while Po Yang countered by inviting the secondary powers of Western Asia into the fray, like Tianshui and Mangkuang, though the Buddhist League headed by Ayutthaya joined in as well, though Lanzhang did not want to and found themselves invaded as well for violating their responsibility to the alliance. In 1512, Shaojin made a separate peace with Po Yang, while Rajasthan joined the war on the side of Ayutthaya and therefore Nam Ning, seeing an opportunity to conquer some of the petty kingdoms of western China. That same year, Avarignia's war against Rome ended, and the kingdom managed to escape with its life. In 1513, with the influx of those trying to escape the war at home, the colony of Pomo grew large enough to administer itself, becoming the first true colonial state in the world, with its own governor, or Zhouzhang Youyunhua. Pomo's colonial model was the archetype of success and would come to be emulated as closely as possible by the other eastern powers. By 1517, the Kai-Chao War ended in a white peace, though Rajasthan did take its pound of flesh from Tianshui. In 1519, Urad expanded its borders, conquering most of Kajal, a minor kingdom of Tibetan Buddhists. In 1521, Denmark regained some of its dignity by conquering the tribal Sami people of their far north. In August of 1526, King Severian VIII Indocchides de Roma ascended to the throne. Beginning in 1527, a conflict broke out with the cannibal natives of the Windward Isles, which Avarignia had to directly contend with. Native uprisings were more of an issue for Western countries like Avarignia, having not yet mastered the art of gunpowder warfare, reducing them to melee combat. Though they did have metal weapons and armor, which still proved to help a great deal in its own right. In 1529, Rex Asnar Indocchides de Roma ascended to the throne of Avarignia. In May of 1532, the Windward Isles reached a point of self-sufficiency, becoming a colonial administration in much the same way as Pomo had, establishing the colony of Nikasate, translated as the Windy Regions. In 1533, Urad attempted an invasion of Laizhou, only to suffer a rude awakening at the fact that Laizhou had invented rifling, allowing for the shots of their men to miss far less often than the typical muskets of their day. Ultimately, Urad lost their southern marches to Laizhou. In 1534, Tianshui collapsed into civil war, continuing their decline. In 1538, Samogisha completed their conquest of the Danish north, relegating Denmark to a clutch of small territories just south of Norland. In 1541, in order to decrease unrest amongst the colonists and ensure problems were being directly addressed, the position of Zhejiang in Pomo was made an elective one, with terms of 5 years. This ensured that those occupying the position were actually competent officials and not beneficiaries of nepotism. It was also around this time that the Pomo colony made contact with the Nuchanoth settlement of Shaojin. On the 1st of December 1541, Avarignia fabricated a claim on Zamor, specifically the major city of Mers el-Kabir, stating that it threatened trade and was a hub for piracy. Tribalia joined in this war effort, bringing its own navy to bear against Zamor. The first battle was a naval one, in the Gulf of Almeria, where Avarignia easily bested them. The second battle was a land battle, the Battle of Garb, where the Zamori were handily defeated once again. Mers el-Kabir was captured in 1543, and several more cities would fall soon thereafter. The war would go on like this until roughly 30,000 Tripolian men arrived in 1544, and Zamor surrendered. Ultimately, the peace was humiliating. Zamor was carved up, and its entire coastline was annexed by Avarignia, turning Zamor into a landlocked country. Essentially a death sentence for a naval-based country which relied upon the slave trade. On the heels of this defeat, their rival slavers to the south, Toro, declared war on them, angling to annex their oasis towns and perhaps what little territory they had left. This action on the part of Avarignia not only cemented Zamor's decline, but also Toro's rise. As such, Avarignia dusted off its old infrastructure and got back into the slave trade, partnering with Toro for wider distribution. However, this cooperation would often turn into conflict, as Avarignia simply supplemented its economy with the slave trade, whereas Toro relied on it almost completely, the institution being a justification for the very existence of the kingdom. This ultimately meant that there would be some tension between the two so long as they both existed in the same market. In 1546, Lijo won a war against the Cusco Empire, establishing the colony of Tarija, separate from their holdings in Coquimbo. By 1551, Norland finished off Denmark, but this gave occasion for conflict between them and Samogisha, who were once their brothers. Indeed, they both still aligned themselves with Rome, and Imperator Domenico Caesarea of Carnia attempted to be the one to mediate peace. Later that year, the Shaojin territory of Nuchinolth became a colony, calling itself Salish, and Poyang responded with a colonial war, sending Pomo to undo this new northern rival. A month later, Fu Shi Da of the Yuzhou Church declared that the Salish colony and all the continent north of it was the sole domain of Shaojin, while the Pomo colony and all the continent south of it belonged to Poyang. This declaration ended the war, and of course only covered the northern continent of the New World and not the southern one. This was called the Shaoyang Endowment, and would be a source of contention for decades to come, especially given the fact that the New World was not nearly well mapped enough to yet fully understand the ramifications of such a prescription. In 1553, Lijo became the first to gain a second colony, the Fushi confirming that Kalama was the sole territory of Lijo, same as neighboring Tarija. All of the wealth coming in from the New World at this time caused another boom of invention and innovation, like mass ironworking factories in Shaojin, improvements in lens making in Namning, and even the first circumnavigation from Poyang. It took 246 days, or just over 35 weeks, for a fleet of 13 ships headed by the Wanmei, translating to perfection, under the command of an intrepid explorer named Jia Haopeng, to circle the world. From the port of Waichou, he headed west, steering clear of Rajasthan, being fired upon by Phrygian vessels, trading with the locals in Antomoro, rounding the south of Africa and making port again in Toro, trading for slaves and supplies. The Wanmei and her fleet then wandered up the coast of South America, making port in the Avarignian colony of Nikasate, before heading south again, rounding the Horn of South America, being fired upon by Kalama colonists, then finally making it back to Poyang, landing at the port in Fuzhou. On the back of his voyage, the two continents of the New World were to be henceforth known as Pengbei and Pengnan, or North Peng and South Peng. This achievement was the capstone which led to them being the utmost great power of the age. The news traveled around the world, and even the highest of aristocrats in Rome or Avarignia couldn't help but feel as though they had been searched and found lacking. They were only just beginning to understand the canon, while these bizarre foreigners knew the method of rifling, observed the heavens with complex telescopes, and forged the world's oceans, circling the globe in less than a year. A poignant shame was accented by a certain paranoia of what was to come when they ran out of land. Would they come for them next, replace their kings, enslave their people? Indeed, only time would tell. For now, only one European power had mastered the art of the sail, and even then their colonization of the New World was slow going. The rest of Europe came to the same grim realization that Phrygia did all those years ago. The knowledge that all they could do was build their thick walls and pray, hoping their 10,000 gods have what it takes to challenge just one.